morning.
Good
Welcome
morning.
to Shambles at Home Festival. We've all had an extra half an hour lie-in, haven't we, Josie? I've been learning about Mott and Bailey, curtain walls, round towers. That's been I don't know what your homeschooling's been today. Mine has very much been on the formation of castles.
I will never forget how much I loved learning about castle and cathedral architecture in year 7. I loved it so much, like a flying buttress, the ribbed vault.
And then the importance in later on for our thinking of the spandrel as well. I mean, so many different elements. I love it is that's what I find the most joyous thing about homeschooling is, one, trying to get some of my maths brain working again, because all of and two is just returning to, because I love that. I think we've talked about this before, those Usborne historical books where you would also I love a cross section, and that's never gone away.
A great house. I mean, obviously class reasons difficult sometimes, but a great house, how the great house works, can't get enough. Yes, and they're so beautifully done.
Yeah, they never used to do the cross section through the pauper's grave, did they? That was the one thing that seemed to be missing. Anyway, we'll tell you who was on today. This is a kind of slightly new, not really a new format. We're going to concentrate a little bit more on the show and tells a few times this week, and we're doing them a little bit shorter because we know that you all have now, things are kind of going in a different rhythm, and you have many other things to do. So coming up this week, by the way, tomorrow we have a double Zaltzman feast. We have Helen Zaltzman and Andy Zaltzman.
It's a Zaltzman family reunion.
Oh, that was one of my favourite things. What was the name? The Trachtenberg family slide.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I looked them up because I think the daughter is now a drummer with another band, or it might
she must be about 20 now.
Oh, she must be over 20. For those of you who don't know, Trachtenberg Family Slideshow had this wonderful period about 2005, I think, where they got really well known, and they were a family band. So it was husband, wife, and daughter on the drums, who I think was about 10 or 11 years old probably when I saw them. And they used to just find great old boxes of slides at auctions and stuff, and then they would turn them. So they would take just a kind of box of slides, and they would turn them into songs using these slides as the way of kind of hooking. And it was a really, you saw it, didn't you, Josie?
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Wonderful celebratory thing. So also George Egg, by the way, has got cooking tips for us tomorrow. And on Wednesday, we have the stars of one of my favourite films of this year. We have Claudia Doherty, and we have Maeve Higgins, who from Extraordinary. If you've not seen Extraordinary yet, it is great fun. I think it's on Netflix, isn't it, as far as I remember?
Yes, and also they're just some of the funniest people in the world, on the planet. They're such funny women. And so such great talents in their own rights. So you should seek out their writing and their performance.
I love Claudia's series of makeover. If you have a look for this, it was a series done in Australia of kind of 5-minute pieces, which appear initially to be a YouTube channel of makeover advice. And in each episode, there's a little bit more of a revelation. I would tell you no more than that.
I should say those are written by Nick Coyle, who's a long-term collaborator of hers. And between them, they just have the most fantastic and unusual imagination into their comedy. And so when they make sketches, you just get so much delight because it's so not route 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. If you have any questions you want for them, send us your questions. And the same for tomorrow. If you would like to ask Helen about all the words, and if you'd like to ask Andy about all the cricket, that's roughly how we can handle all that. Remind you also, there's a tip jar at the bottom of this. We have now given out so far £15,000 to artists and art centres over the last few weeks, and we're still trying to build that up and work as a support network. And as I keep saying, and Josie keeps saying as well, a lot of it is to keep those kind of social hubs, those local art centres, is to keep them going, so there's places for everyone to go after this is all over and done with. And I think that's all of the and we also have this is great, by the way. What Trent does, you don't know any of this at home, is he just puts up lots of little things in the corner for us to look, but they come up for 1 second. So in the middle of conversation, so all I can say is FGs on Wednesday. Hopefully that's correct. We're also joined by the FGs on Wednesday. That may well, something will pop up. Playing music. They will be playing music. Thank you, Trent. This auto cue system is frankly bunkum. Anyway, what's your show and tell today, Josie? Well, I wanted to show you this. Hang on. So when I was about 17, my mum bought me this doll, this statue of a little girl doing a sort of Spanish dance. And then my daughter knocked it off. And now it doesn't have a head. And I feel like if I get rid of it, that's accepting that I've lost, you know. It's accepting that it's gone. But if I keep it, it's bad. So it's just a kind of holding statue until
is it actually a hole where the head's been knocked off? Put flowers in it, make it into because then it will look like something from a Takeshi Kitano movie. I think that will look. I think that the beheaded vase is a lovely creation and available from our channel.
Okay, I'll do it tomorrow.
I love things like that. I love going to museums where they just have bits of statues that are left. Or there was a lovely in the I think it was the is it not the Whitworth, the one in New York. I've got half the title there, the Whit something, and they had an exhibition of unfinished paintings. The Whitney, and it was just fantastic. All of these paintings where great artists had gone, no, that's not working out. And so sometimes they were headless, sometimes there was a bit of a head, sometimes the sun had been begun. But that bit of the process, I think, is beautiful.
Do you ever have that where you find an old notebook? And I've got all these short stories that I've started but not finished. That's like I've got 50 short stories I've started but not finished, and 5 I've finished. Do you know what I mean? And I find a notebook and I start reading. I'm like, oh, this is actually really good. And then it just stops. And I'm like, great, because I can't remember where that was supposed to go. And I'm a different person now.
Yeah, so. I love writing the first page of a short story. And then you realise there has to be structure. So you go, oh, I've come up with an image. Well, how does that connect to anything? I don't know. In fact, I think I've got one of my notebooks here. I've got my Adrian. There we are. These must have been. I think this was 2005 when I only wrote in Adrian Tomonay notebooks.
Yes, I remember.
They were the thing for me then. And my show and tell. I've just realised I've created an avalanche of books now. My show and tell today, because we've got Bruce Hood on. I thought he, of course, as a psychologist, knows a great deal about phrenology and how it works and how our brains work from touching our bumps. So this is, I don't have that many actual knickknacks. I have a lot of trash in my house, printed material. But this, I love these. So all of that section of your brain is moral and religious sentiments. All of that bit just there. But on the other side, man, so much is going on. You've got stability, power of will, antiquity. That's where you keep your antiquity.
How did they possibly pretend to have discovered this?
Well, I mean, through science, Josie. Through science.
What experiment could you possibly do that you could pretend would yield that result? Like tap someone.
That's what they used to make this. Was they used that corner of the brain there, which has reasoning, causality, and planning. That little lump there.
What? That's so small, but moral and religious sentiments so big.
Well, true of all of us, eh? This is so. To find out more about that and many other things, welcome Professor Bruce Hood. Hello, Bruce. How are you?
Hi there, Robin. Welcome to here.
This is so. Tell us, because before we'll talk about your latest book and your show and tell them about. But phrenology it's such. I mean, it creates such a beautiful bust, but underneath that lies very little evidence-based thinking. Is that fair enough to say?
Yes, absolutely. It's complete pseudoscience. It was the pseudoscience of the 19th century. But actually, Galton, one of our kind of leading early psychologists, he was a cousin of Darwin, of course, he was involved also in this sort of whole approach of phrenology. And Josie, the way they figured out the relationship was basically, it was worked on this naive assumption that, the brain is like a muscle. So if you build it up, it will bulge. And so that's why they went to sort of feeling the bumps on your head. And so the technique was to feel lots of bumps on your head and then see what does everyone have in common. And that was how they made the assumption and mapped out what they thought were the various areas of the brain dedicated to different functions. But of course, it's all bunkum. But it persevered well into the early 20th century, and that's where we get the phrase having your head examined. And indeed, phrenologists would go around kind of touching your head, but then technology came along, and then they built this machine which could automatically feel the bumps on your head. But yeah, it's still a bit of a pseudoscience. However, I would say to my neuroscience colleagues out there, and I'm sure this will be very controversial, a lot of the new imaging techniques are arguably a recapitulation of phrenology by looking for little areas and bumps in the brain. So things haven't entirely changed.
But that is so, because the religion and morality is so big, is that why bishops have to wear such big hats? If you actually take the hat off, is it just a huge, it's the same shape?
Yeah, they're cone heads. Yeah, underneath it all. They're from another planet.
Now, something we really want to work, because your latest book, which is all about why we want to possess things, why we want to possess, is and it's a very good. I mean, I've enjoyed all your books, and I say I've enjoyed it, but I also realise that there's no such thing as self. So you told me that. So, but that's a great book as well, by the way, about the nature of self and kind of ego theory and bundle theory and all of that. But yeah, lovely. But both Josie and I were looking at, as many other people have, Sarah Vine and Michael Gove's bookshelf today, which has created some consternation and joy. They have work by what's the, are we? I think we are now officially allowed to call him a Holocaust denier, aren't we? Because I think Deborah Lipstadt went through that.
Yeah.
I think she went through that court case, which is another great book, by the way, Denying History by Deborah
I've seen
Lipstadt.
the film. I've seen the film.
Timothy Spall is so good in that film.
Oh my
God,
he's fantastic.
He is so good. But their shelf, people are really enjoying looking at that, because there's a book by Ayn Rand on that shelf, predominantly kind of quite fusty political biographies and autobiographies. But when we reveal, because I love putting up shelfies, every day I find a new kind of one to put up, and I don't reorder it. I just take the shelf that I've got. And some people get very angry. There's no order. There's absolutely no order. How do you find any of your books? And the simple, it takes time. So what are we doing when we do that? When we place up on social media that image of our bookshelf, what are we trying to what is the message we're trying to give?
Well, as you've already indicated or hinted at, that we're displaying what we believe to be our attributes. So in the book Possessed, I talk about the way that we buy things to signal to other people what we would like them to believe. And I would imagine that having a bookshelf full of highly intellectual kind of content would sort of say, oh, look, I'm the person that reads this sort of thing. In the same way that everyone bought A Brief History of Time, but no one really understood it. So I think people kind of use these objects, and in case books to sort of create a narrative of what they would like to portray to others, which is, by the way, I think I mentioned it earlier, that if you look at Trump's bookshelf in the White House, it's all his autobiographies, although I'm told, in fact, he never wrote them. I don't believe that. I think he's a very reputable writer.
Yeah, there is a guy who came out, the what's it called? The Art of the Deal or whatever. Yeah, one of the writers, the authors came out and talked a lot about that, didn't they?
I tend to also feel that one of the reasons I'm so obsessed with having books is it reminds me of all of the different things that I would like to aspire to be myself. Like the big patchwork of all the different things that I can't hold in my head at one time, but that I would hope to be able to aspire to.
One of the really interesting things was when the electronic books came along, everyone assumed that it would be the death of the printed page, but that didn't happen at all. And that's because I think there's something very tangible about holding a book. There's a kind of emotional component to a physical thing that you don't get from a Kindle. So I think it's really interesting that actually that has, as same thing has happened with vinyl records.
Truly, yeah.
It's become this kind of extension of identity and self to have these physical manifestations of things that you feel very personal. So there's a real emotional connection with objects, which is something I've examined in previous books, talking about the kind of weird and spooky relationship we have with our possessions.
Well, that is a ritual is so much part as well with the book and with it. Because I remember when I had a Saturday job, and then I'd get my little brown envelope with the money in, and I would go, normally it was to Tower Records because that was the nearest one. And I would just leaf through, for 2 hours trying to find what I could afford. And then sitting on the train home, taking out the inner sleeve, going, oh, it's just a blank inner sleeve with Home Tapings Killing Music on it. Boo. Or, taking out and finding the lyrics or the stories in it. All of that was part of the communication and part of the attachment before I'd even placed the record on the record player.
I actually once spoke to an owner of a memorabilia store, and he gave me an insight which, in reflection, is absolutely true. And he said that people, well, they were typically men, I would say, but they would come in and they would buy memorabilia which linked to their age when they were a younger child. And so that's why they bought dinky toys and why they bought things which were reminiscent of their own childhood. So it's, in a sense, it's in a way of manifestation, a physical representation of happier times.
I don't need any of these. I bought all these from Jeff Towns, who I've mentioned before. Dylan Thomas guy, he does put new, but these were so much part of Friday night, some pocket money, one copy of Stories of Suspense or Secrets of the Unknown, and I look at them.
The Simpsons comics. I couldn't believe that these things that were so full of jokes were like allowed. I thought they were really illicit. Even
my son loves them. He thinks they're
really
great.
Good.
Yeah, there's loads of them.
It's a funny thing because I'm really aware now of having reached a certain age, because the other day as an imaginative exercise, I was going, where do I want to go? Where would I like to visit? And loads of my answers were like, the past. I was like, oh no, it's started. It's begun.
But that's why you sometimes really hard about the past, don't you? Because if you, the thing, tarnish it very often, that kind of image where you go, that didn't even happen. That was a picture in a Ladybird book. My mum and dad never had a Morris Traveller, a car partially made out of wood, and when we did go on a picnic, there were wasps everywhere. That's the bit. If you just skirt around it, who was saying the other day, I was interviewing someone and they said that they felt that people feel that the most positive time to have lived was roughly when their mum and dad were children. As if somehow the story's been told and the way it's been told has become this one, which is an Ealing film or is one of those other things we might see on Talking Pictures, and it loses all of the hard edges and it loses all of the kind of the mortality and the pain.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you listen to the kind of rhetoric we're hearing from our Prime Minister, it's all this kind of post-war golden era, and indeed Trump sort of talks about exactly the same sort of notion. And this is, of course, Ealing films and Disney and this whole kind of nostalgia, which is completely wrong, of course, because it's nothing better than the good old days and a bad memory. We just don't actually remember anything really well.
So we should get to your show and tell.
Yeah, we should.
What is it?
Okay, so this is it's a Hardtack biscuit, okay, which is made of flour and water and salt, and it dates from 1917 to 18. Wow. And this was very common. The soldiers would write on these things because they're totally inedible, although this one's had a piece eaten out of it. They would send these home as cards, and the reason this one's really important is this came from my grandfather, who served in Palestine in 1917 and 18, and I think my father, when he got his hands on it, he tried to taste it, and it would have been disgusting. But here is this is my grandfather, and you can see this resemblance, okay? Yeah. And I wanted to just talk about that just briefly because he was, he rode a horse in the cavalry. He fought in the First World War in the Fife and Forfar Yeomanry, and I've actually got the history of that regiment, and there are segments of it where they talk about being in the trenches, and it's at 5 o'clock the downpour started, accompanied by thunder and lightning. The Anzac River broke the spate, washing away the Turkish and the Highland barricades, carrying horses, mules, men, dead and alive, down with it. And that was on the 26th of November. On the 28th, my grandfather was shot, but he survived. So that was 1915. And what's remarkable is he obviously went back to the trenches because he sent a biscuit from 1917 to 18. And of course, this is at the time when the Spanish flu pandemic started to ravish our world. So I wanted to bring it all into kind of context about how, we do have incredible abilities to go through immense times. We think we are in the worst circumstances. And yet when you kind of just check, you realize actually things do come around in cycles again, and we have incredible resilience. So that's my show and tell. It's a biscuit.
Wow, that was like a curated exhibition.
Yes.
Well, that was so terrified that you were going to say, and my challenge is to eat the entire thing now.
It's actually, It's rock hard. I mean, I don't know how anyone can eat them. They sell these on eBay, but this is obviously personal to me, so it's going nowhere. It's Judean Hills, Palestine, 1917 to 1918. So yeah, that was 2 years after he'd been wounded. He went back to fight again. So
I think I do.
And I come from a family of military people. I'm the one person who never. I was too much of a I'm too much of a wuss. And I don't think I could ever put myself in their shoes reading about these narratives of those fighting in the trenches. So it kind of makes me feel a little bit more humble and incredibly grateful, even in these circumstances.
Yeah.
See, I got worried.
Think about that. Oh, sorry.
That's all. You thought I was going to say...
I often think about the fact that one of the main reasons we're so incredibly lucky at the moment. I mean, obviously, not to diminish any of the difficulty of the sadness or any of it, but I am so glad and grateful that we are all fighting something that is external to humanity, and that we're not fighting each other, and that it isn't about warfare and it isn't about animosity. Because, when I think about, people who had to live through wars, I can't imagine the psychic torment of that, the difficulty of that, and the sadness that accompanied that, and then also having to accompanied, as if that isn't happening now in the world, but I'm just very, very aware, that it's so different, this circumstance to that circumstance.
So that's why I'm also slightly annoyed when I hear politicians kind of evoking the war spirit and the jingoistic spirit, when the reality was really quite terrible.
And also when they are not doing any kind of a moral duty towards refugees at the same time. With one hand they're saying, oh well, it's very brave to fight in a war, and on the other hand they're saying these people who are fleeing persecution shouldn't be allowed it. It's horrible. Oh, sorry, just my speech for the day.
No, but it's that what I find fascinating as well is that sense of the connection that you need, because that's what I thought you were going to do, because knowing in the past that you have shown items and you have imbued them with some kind of value or connection, sometimes to the great and sometimes to mass murderers, and then you go, it's just a jumper, it wasn't Fred West's jumper at all. So I thought you were going to create this beautiful emotional biscuit based story and then go, it's just a biscuit I bought yesterday and wrote on.
Are you a fan of pranks?
Yeah, I do that. I do. The prank that Robin's alerting to is I did when I had my first book called Super Sense, I did some press releases, and I held up this cardigan and I said, how many people would wear this for £20? Everyone puts their hands up. I said, yeah, but would you wear it if you knew it belonged to Fred West? And of course, everyone puts their hands down. I went, no, it's okay. I just got it out of a thrift shop. It's nobody's cardigan. But the point is, the belief is tangible enough. People think they're going to be contaminated with evil energies and essences. But no, this is actually a real piece of memorabilia for me. So yeah, we have this connection with the physical things in our world, which is, in many ways, it's irrational, and in other ways, it's actually very comforting.
I also think it's interesting when you were just talking about the battle in the previous wars and things. Our understanding now, there's so many, we still hear people say, well, the previous generation, they just got on with it afterwards. They didn't have post-traumatic shock, all of this kind of stuff. And actually, the truth of that, we seem to have a very hidden history, this idea that, many people will have had a relative who was damaged by a war, they covered it up. And Patrick Stewart has talked about the fact that, when his father came back, Patrick Stewart helped support, is one of the main, in fact, I think the main supporter in Huddersfield of a domestic abuse, research into domestic abuse. And as far as I know, part of that story is when his father came back from the war, the damage meant that he then behaved sometimes in incredibly abusive ways towards other people. And I think that is something we need to learn as well, isn't it? Because when you see the footage, for instance, from the First World War of people with, who had come out of the trenches with such psychological damage that they couldn't walk or they believed they were blind without any actual, all of those things. What are the lessons we need to learn from actually understanding that and not glossing over this?
The narrative that people talk about, the modern era is full of snowflakes, individual and weak and no resilience. But of course, we can't really do the comparison because you couldn't talk about these sorts of things 30, 40 years ago. So I suppose it's the openness of discussing these things. I actually run a course called The Science of Happiness, another promotion, and it's incredibly popular. And I think it's because we've actually legitimized the language of talking about mental well-being. And you're absolutely right. There was whole sorts of hysterical blindness, hysterical problems. And unfortunately, memory does have this kind of nostalgic rose-tinted glasses. We see everything as being much more kind of noble. But as we said, and as these accounts written firsthand indicate that these guys were terrified. But that doesn't fit with our kind of narrative that we want to make it out to be more of a kind of heroic effort.
Mm-hmm. And people would sort of reclaim the entire endeavor away from empire building to some sort of like good versus evil thing, and not the mass slaughter of the working classes.
So this is on
no.
We're going to thank you so much, Bruce, for that. Was a beautiful show and tell, and I love that the biscuits thing is just there's such intro. Some of the museums and some of the pieces of again, sometimes it's the more mundane elements of what appear to be mundane, which offer quite a rich and tooth-breaking story. So Bruce's new book it's not in paperback yet, is it? It's
coming on August in paperback, called Possessed. Why do we want more than we need? And it's a tale of the folly of materialism, and that's very relevant in this pandemic era.
And don't forget, you can also, as well as the normal online stores, there are lots of independent bookshops that are still supplying books. So go to, if you can, try and support your local independent bookshop. Get in contact with them. They're getting books out there. Newham Bookshop, we always mention as that's one of our favourites. So thank you very much, Professor Bruce Hoods. We are now going to go over to this is it's an exclusive. This is Laura, who I know some of you have seen before at some of the gigs that we've done at the Albert Hall, the Cosmic Shambles and the Hammersmith, and you will have seen her touring as She Makes War. That all ended sometime between October and November, and now she is someone entirely different. This is the Peter Davison moment. She is now Penfriend. So Laura, can you tell us a little bit about the new incarnation and why you felt it was necessary?
Well, I put music out for about 10 years with the other name, and I think I just needed a change. I think I think names are really important. I think language is really important. I stand by everything I did under that name. I think that I thought people would get it more than they did when I came up with it a really long time ago, and it just, I don't know, I think it just you grow over the course of a decade, and that was the first decade I'd been making my own music and sharing it with people. And I realized very, very early on, actually, that it was not me against the world. It was me with some people from the world who also wanted to be with me. So it's much more of a community thing really early on. And so the name very quickly became quite redundant because I wasn't actually fighting anything. And then it just got to the point where I thought, it's the right time to change and to make something new. And so from the very start, Penfriend is much more community-based. I'm just embracing that from the very start. And so it launched on Friday with a membership club and a members-only forum, and people are chatting. And I realised as well, I've been doing a lot of thinking about it over the last little while, about how really I can be a bridge between different people. So it's not about that kind of rock star, pop star thing where you're the one on the stage and everyone looks up to you and thinks you're brilliant. It's actually about going, well, I'm one person, but you're thousands of really interesting people. And why don't you get in touch with each other and have conversations? And yeah, of course, I want to chat to you as well. But it's more about them chatting to each other. And so I launched the forum yesterday, and people are like introducing themselves and having a nice chat. And because it's not social media, it's not a public one. It's not a Facebook group. It's not Twitter or anything. It's its own separate thing. People just feel more comfortable and they feel more welcome. And so I'm really interested to see where that goes, because it's so exciting to see it start.
That's interesting. Cult.
A cult?
I was joking, but I wonder if everyone just took it really seriously.
Or you could call it a cult.
No, it sounds amazing. It doesn't sound like a cult at all.
It's so lovely. We'll see.
That reminds me of Josie. I don't know if you remember, many years ago at the End of the Road Festival, we went to see Hefner, and they hadn't performed for a while. And Darren Hayman he didn't look happy about it at all. I was chatting to him afterwards, and I went, "Oh, that was such a great gig." And he went, "Ugh." And I said, "Oh, you don't see." But he said, "Imagine if I said to you, oh, Robin, I'd like to book you for a festival, but could you do your set from 15 years ago?" And I went, "Oh, yeah." And I think it was because he had. Hefner, I think, are a great band, and I think everything that Darren Hayman has done since is really interesting and worthwhile. But he'd reached that point where he went, "Those songs were written by that 27-year-old." and now I'm 37, and these are the things in my head, and these are the different ways and I think that's a kind of, it's quite easy sometimes especially when you want people just to return to what they have been, to not realize that we change so rapidly.
I understand him saying that in some ways, but also I think, God, I wish people wanted me to play stuff from 15 years ago and would fill a tent to see them. I'd happily play those songs. It's just that I think it's about being an active artist and making new stuff all the time. For me, like I'm happy to play older songs if people really want me to. God, I'd love that. I'd love people to go, but what about that old song that we love and we want to support? Yes, of course. But I think it's just about having new adventures all the time and seeing where things will go. To be honest, if I thought about it a little harder when I came up with the name, I wish I'd come up with Penfriend then, because I think it's an ace name and it suits me so much better. But oh well, I've done it now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing with words is the fact that for some reason, where I don't remember having any particular presumptions when I first heard you, but as you said, some people went, "Oh, she makes war." Oh, what does that mean? It's got war in the title. What's she going to do? Yeah, and it's
when you're scanning a festival bill, like who are you going to go and see? This thing that sounds a bit too aggressive. Or this thing that you've heard of already. So I think it's nice to be a bit more mysterious and less fighty sounding.
I'd have probably gone for the more aggressive one. What about you, Josie?
I think I 100% would have gone for Penfriend at the start of my career. But by now, I'd be going for something very aggressive. So, I think it's much better to go the other way around than...
Yeah. Like everything in life, I've done it the wrong way round.
No, I mean, you've done it the right way round. Oh. I'd much rather go from aggro to cooperation. I think that's brilliant.
Well, we're going to... you're going to play one of the new songs, Penfriend songs, and just mention again, tomorrow we're back at 10 o'clock tomorrow, 10 o'clock on Tuesday and Wednesday, and we have Zaltzman double bill. We have Andy Zaltzman and Helen Zaltzman, and we also have our musical guests tomorrow, who are the FGs probably, and no, George Egg's tomorrow. George Egg is tomorrow. He's not musical guest. He'll be making cod mornay inside a trouser press or something like that, which is what he normally does. And also remind you of the tip jar as well. We've given away £15,000 so far to artists and art centres, and also if you can go to Patreon, if you support us for our Patreon, we're still making other stuff which is not merely kind of lockdown related as well. And so Josie, what are you up to for the rest of the day?
I'm going to be doing a small amount of work, and then when my daughter wakes up from her nap, I will be doing, like Play-Doh, I think. And she really, really wants to give everything a bath. So I guess I'm going to give all the toys a bath.
A lovely mixture of decapitation and then bathing the decapitated dolls. There's so much going on in her narrative, isn't there? And I'm going to make an owl, a collage owl. That's my thing. Photo montage collage owl is my next bit of homeschooling.
I love it. Bruce, what does your day hold? Oh, you're muted. But
it was a bit enigmatic, though. A very enigmatic message there.
I was going to say I'm still teaching my lectures, actually I kind of enjoy this because that means I don't have to traipse into the lecture halls. It's kind of good.
Brilliant. And you can follow Bruce Hood on and all of the other normal places to find out more about his work and the speakeasy stuff. There's loads of stuff out there, and it is all very interesting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to her attic. It is Penfriend.
I play my song. You can get the song for free from me because I've decided that is a good thing to do. This is where you get it. Penfriend.rocks. It's the whole new world of my world I'm making. All right, this is called The Only Way Out Is Through.
Through.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So go to penfriend.rocks. See you tomorrow.
That's so exciting. You've got the whole kind of community built up already. That's wonderful.
So good. Yeah.
It's really cool.
Join us.
Thank
you.